American Edward Snowden, the man responsible for the biggest intelligence leak in U.S. history by exposing the mass surveillance activities of the National Security Agency, wanted for espionage in the United States. He continues to live in exile in Moscow, and now he's the focus of a major new film.
I love it. There's something going on inside the government that's really wrong, and I can't ignore it.
Snowden is directed by the acclaimed Academy Award winner Oliver Stone.
Okay.
Oliver Stone and historian Peter Kuznick sat down with me in New York to talk about the film and Edward Snowden on this special edition of The Heat. Oliver Stone, Peter Kuznick, welcome back to the show. Oliver, congratulations on the release of Snowden. I saw the movie. It's a fascinating movie about a very complex man. When we look at Edward Snowden right at the beginning of the movie, we see a young guy who has very conservative values. What do you think drove him from being this CIA worker, from being this worker for the National Security Agency, to becoming the man who leaked probably the biggest trove of documents, classified documents in U.S. history?
His father, his grandfather were military people, FBI also. They were serious. This is the average American outlook. This is what dominates our media. This is the way to serve your country, especially from the South. He was from North Carolina, and he worked his way at the age of 21, 22, after the military, into the CIA. No high school education. So he wanted to serve after 9/11. He felt strongly about the Iraq War, was correct. He was, I would say, though, more libertarian in his views, you know, in his early stages. Then he met his girlfriend, it becomes a 9-year relationship. And in the course of those 9 years, he goes to various posts like Geneva, then he goes to Japan, and ultimately to Hawaii, where he sees things that are shocking to him, shocking in its blithe disregard for the Constitution. I suppose as a fundamentalist, he's a Constitution. He believes highly in the Constitution. And when his loyalty is to that, it's an interesting idea, by the way, but not to the NSA. In other words, he pledged loyalty to the Constitution, and legally he is correct. When your boss is breaking the law constantly, and he sees it in a mass surveillance way, global system that no one could, I mean, no one really believed it until it happened, until it came out. And they still don't believe it, because it's much worse than we think. It's much bigger than we think. Anyway, when he finds that out, plus the fact that his girlfriend has more liberal instincts than he has, plus the fact that he had epilepsy, he discovered the epilepsy at a time when he was very crucial. His tension level went way up in Maryland before he moved to Hawaii. And I think if we never know the origin of epilepsy, his mother had it, but it comes out all of a sudden. I think it's a spiritual sickness. It's a physical ailment, but it signifies a spiritual tension in him.
I want to bring Peter in, but Oliver, let me ask you this. You have a reputation in your career as a movie director for taking on big issues, big names, you know, J.F. Kennedy, Nixon, the Vietnam War. This project, the Snowden project, you initially turned it down. Why is that?
I don't want to get involved in chasing the news. I mean, that's your job. I mean, I can't. A movie takes a year, 2 years. It's a huge amount of money. It's an investment of that kind. You cannot chase the news because it changes all the time. The interpretations change. So my instincts were, no, I'd had too many things blow up in my face. You know, I tried to do a movie about the My Lai massacre. That was many years ago, but that even was too controversial. I tried to do a movie about King. Don't chase the news. In other words, find subjects you feel comfortable with, get to know them. I waited until Nixon died. He had died a year before. I'd heard that he didn't want the film to be made, but his family was very upset. But frankly, that's the only way you can go about something without being sued, without getting public pressure. However, in this case, the story is too important to walk away from. And after meeting him and going back, I met him 3 times before we committed to the screenplay. We decided to go the realistic route and do as good a screenplay as close to reality as we could.
And then
to
you
the
met him
trauma.
several times during the making of the movie?
I went back ultimately 9 times to Moscow.
Peter, how significant is a movie like Snowden in this era that we're living in right now, where there is mass surveillance, where there is this massive amount of intelligence gathering?
It's a frightening situation if you realize how pervasive this surveillance is, how little privacy we have left. And for somebody like Snowden to come on the scene and to reveal this at enormous personal risk, right? He didn't know if he was going to be shut down before he got a word of it out. He didn't know if he was going to be assassinated. He's threatened with spending most of his life in jail. So he took that risk because he believed so deeply that it was essential that the people understand the degree of surveillance. And the fact that Oliver can take this. Now, Oliver, I was listening because Oliver has some real insight into that process, because Oliver, in some ways, was like a young Snowden, much more conservative, joined the military, volunteered for combat in Vietnam, only person probably in the history of Yale to drop out of Yale to volunteer for combat in Vietnam. And then as he went through the process and started to learn more and see more of the world, his ideas began to change. Snowden goes through a similar kind of process in a shorter period of time when he's confronted with that reality. So the fact that Oliver, and uniquely, and probably only Oliver, could bring this to the screen to an audience of hundreds of millions, we hope, around the world, is a tremendous service. It's already changed the conversation.
Right, and Oliver, the movie does tell us a lot about Snowden the man, Snowden the person, and all the emotions that he goes through as he is telling the world about these things that the United States government is doing. You did an interview with USA Today, the newspaper here in the United States, and you told them, and I'm quoting here, that this was a painfully difficult movie to make. Why was it difficult?
Well, first of all, having the right information is because so little has been written about the National Security Agency. There's been 3 books by Jim Bamford, who I talked to extensively. There was some revelations from Bill Binney back in 2000 when he protested against what was going on, the mass eavesdropping. Then there was Thomas Drake affair, which was a very important affair but it revealed to us that even a senior level officer of the NSA could not go through legal channels because he was actually charged by the government with the things that he revealed. In other words, they went after him because of his revelations instead of airing those out in a general complaint. He went to court, his life was ruined, and charges were essentially dropped, except for 1 misdemeanor.
Peter, there are those who have called Edward Snowden a traitor, and they make the argument that, yes, there is mass surveillance, but it has saved lives. We need this in the post-9/11 era. What do you say to them?
I say that it's nonsense. First of all, they make these claims, how the mass surveillance has stopped all these terrorist attacks. First, they come out and say, well, they stopped 54 terrorist attacks and we can prove it. Then people investigate. And they whittle it down and say, well, it stopped 12 terrorist attacks. Finally, they found out that they exposed the fact that somebody sent $8,500 to Somalia. And that's what they come up with. It's sort of like what happened with the torture report recently. You know, they claim that torture gave us all this incredible information. And then when they begin to actually investigate, scrutinize, they find that got nothing out of the torture. The same thing with the surveillance. So they do make that claim repeatedly, but we haven't seen any of the evidence to support that.
Oliver, there is a scene in the movie where one character says, Americans are not concerned about security. They're concerned about freedom. They're concerned about security. The implication there being that you can't have both.
I think that's a false equation, and it's used all the time, but I don't get it because they're not providing them security. It's a bargain made with the devil. You don't want to make it. And furthermore, we didn't have any consent in it. We were just told that your life is more important than anything. It's for the public good. We are protecting your life. But in return, we have to be able to pull whatever liberties we feel are necessary. They don't even tell you how or what they're thinking. It was what Hitler did in 1933 when he came to power. Bill Binney's pointed that out. There was a we promise you security, but we need your loyalty, and we need to protect you, but we can't tell you exactly what it is. So it's a bad deal.
Right, you talk about the fact that you are reluctant to chase the news and make a movie like Snowden.
Yeah.
What are the challenges then of making a movie that is critical of United States policy?
Well, that I've been critical of for a long time because of the, as you know, the Vietnam movie started it. The Salvador movie is very important to me because it was the 1980s when I woke up to...
We haven't seen a movie that's critical of the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan?
I have not made that. Although I did do W about Mr. Bush, and I showed some of the thinking behind that. You know, it was not about national security. It was, and we also, the character in our movie, Rhys Ifans plays,
right,
who's a senior official, talks about it being a horseshit war for sand and oil. And he talks about the real threat to America will come from China, from Russia, from Iran with sequel injections of malware, he says. This is cyber warfare. And this is the American way of thinking. Create a threat, exaggerate it, and then you continue to build up this military-industrial security complex.
Well, it's softening up public opinion, isn't it?
Of course it is.
Yeah.
And manipulating it. As Noam Chomsky says very well, you know, manufacturing consent.
Peter, we are now living, or appear to be living, in this world where it's a free-for-all environment as far as mass surveillance is concerned. Anything goes. The US government is complaining bitterly right now about what Snowden has done. But is it the US government that started all of this, that set the precedent?
Yes, the US government does set the precedent. We can actually trace this back historically, right? The first surveillance campaign began in the Philippines in 1901. It was Captain Ralph Van Diemen, who's known as the father of US military intelligence, who started it in the Philippines as part of our crackdown against the popular uprising there. Then during World War I, Van Diemen sets up similar programs in the United States for surveillance of Germans and for and radicals. And then we use that as the basis for the Palmer raids to crack down on dissent after World War I. We expand the program during World War II. Even Franklin Roosevelt's record on this is not unblemished. So in 1940, he lets Hoover loose to go after more surveillance. We put almost 120,000 Japanese Americans in the concentration camps as part of this kind of crackdown during World War II. But then it heats up much more during the Cold War, during McCarthyism, the surveillance. And then it jumps to a new level in the 1960s to stop the anti-war movement in Vietnam and the civil rights movement. So we've got these COINTELPRO operations on a much larger scale with hundreds of thousands of people being surveilled as part of this with wiretaps and break-ins and all kinds of phony tricks that were going on during that time. Right. So we just keep on expanding. And finally, now we have this signals intelligence, we've got this electronic capability, and we've got this drone capability, and we put this all together in the battlefields of Iraq under McChrystal, and so we've got a whole new world now. I mean, if you put it in historical context, the capability that the United States has now is so vast, so pervasive, so invasive, that there really is nothing they want to know everything.
Okay, we are going to take a break right now, more with Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick. When we come back, we're going to leave you now with an excerpt from the movie Snowden.
And there's that moment when you're sitting there and the scale of it hits you. The NSA is really tracking every cell phone in the world. No matter who you are, every day of your life, you're sitting in a database just ready to be looked at.